if you never lived in a van, then it's all hypotheticals, right? You're just looking at shiny things on the internet. You see them in YouTube videos or Instagram, and you're like, "Oh, I want." But it doesn't mean it's necessarily great for living. So we try and sort of inject the reality into that and help people make sort of good decisions for them.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 284 with Nate Murphy. Nate Murphy is an adventurous builder and filmmaker who has taken on not just one, but countless incredible projects, converting several vans into cozy living spaces and renovating a centuries-old house in the beautiful Pyrenees Mountains. In our conversation, Nate shares his experience of building a van from scratch, documenting every step of the process with over 100 hours of footage. We'll dive into the challenges of editing that massive amount of content down into 70 videos and the exhaustion and determination that went into the final product. Nate also opens up about the intense filming process and the unique aspects of van conversion that make it both intimidating and incredibly cool. But that's not all. Nate goes beyond the van and shares the captivating story of renovating a 250-year-old house in the scenic Pyrenees. From stripping down the structure to its bare bones to envisioning its future, we'll hear about the demanding and rewarding journey of bringing new life to this historical gem. Whether you're curious about van conversions, tiny house living, or the challenges of renovating an old house, this episode has something for everyone. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired by Nate Murphy's tales of adventure, construction, and the pursuit of a simpler way of living. Let's jump in. I asked John and Finn Kernahan of United Tiny House Association what they love about their precision temp hot water heaters, and here's what they told me.
Hey, Ethan, this is John and Finn Kernahan with United Tiny House Association.
We organize Tiny House Festival.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
First and foremost.
We have a total of 3 precision temp on-demand hot water heaters. The thing we really like about these, and folks know this, I think they picked this up on Finn and I, if we don't like something, you'll never hear us talk about it. So the 2 things we noticed that we noticed and experienced immediately, they took painstaking effort to make sure that it was done right and installed. And so that was pretty cool right there. The other thing is the continuous on-demand hot water that just ran forever without any fluctuations or anything. I can't imagine an application, especially in our environment and our lifestyle of being the nomad, transportable, mobile, tiny lifestyle where one of these units aren't good to use.
Right now, Precision Temp is offering $100 off any unit plus free shipping when you use the coupon code THLP. So head over to precisiontemp.com and use the coupon code THLP at checkout for $100 off any unit. That's PRECISION temp.com, coupon code THLP. Thank you so much to Precision Temp for sponsoring our show. All right, I am here with Nate Murphy. Nate Murphy is a rock climbing and van life YouTuber from the UK. He's been traveling for many years and tends to base his travel destinations around good climbing areas throughout the world. On his YouTube channel, Nate shows you how to convert a van into a camper van. He also creates tours of van conversions for inspiration and shares his process of doing his best to practice what he preaches, which is using alternative ways of living so that he can live a more free and adventurous life. Nate Murphy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on, Ethan. It's really great to be on your podcast series.
Great. Yeah, it's great to have you on. I've been following you for so many years, and I don't know how I found you initially, but I came across your guide to converting a van and just found it to be just incredibly comprehensive and helpful. But before we get into all that, I was curious, how did you get into van life in the first place?
So for me, van life started off as just basically it was like a tool. I didn't follow a load of people. I guess it wasn't so much on social media and stuff like that back then. And basically I was on this really sort of career break, and I wanted to focus on rock climbing and just see how hard I could climb. I just wanted to dedicate a lot of time to it. but I obviously had limited amount of savings and income coming in while I was traveling.
Okay.
So a van seemed like a really great tool, and it's really popular for climbers throughout the world to use vans to travel and climb. And so basically, I was drawn to van life as a way to live cheaply wherever I wanted. I could follow the climbing season. I could use it for a base 6 months a year, and then like be in different continent for the other 6 months. Just a really flexible base, home base. Keep all my gear in it, all the ropes and the climbing kit.
Yeah.
And it was just a way to live my life. And I really saw it as a tool rather than like van life as a destination of lifestyle.
Yep.
I saw it as a tool to enable me to do the thing I wanted to do more effectively.
Right. Got it. Yeah. And I've definitely, seen and heard that there is a big van life kind of culture within the rock climbing community, just because the rock climbing is usually in remote locations. You want to be nearby. You want to spend as much time there as possible and not traveling back and forth to like a hotel or something.
Absolutely. And I think also you have in the sort of the climbing culture, there's definitely like a dirtbag, roughing it sort of theme. So the idea of living in a van is actually almost a little bit luxury.
Yeah.
And I think also it's a sport which is a little bit condition dependent. And if you're doing it like for a long period of time, it just makes sense to be able to just move when the conditions are bad.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like in a way the van life, the kind of the tool to get you to the lifestyle that you wanted, it seems like it's in a way it's like taken over what you're doing.
Yeah.
Or is that not true?
I mean, it's certainly taken over in terms of like, I don't know, it really created this sort of career divergence, So before I was doing sort of more startup type things, I lived in London. And then with the van, and I produced videos about how to build a van online, which did like phenomenally well, especially back then. And then I had so many questions, continuous questions. So I thought with that, okay, well, I'll write a book and I'll sell a book.
Yeah.
And that did reasonably well. And then since then, like the YouTube channel grew, I've kind of hired someone to help me do the editing. I had a guy who's also helping me do filming in the States. So it just meant that sort of it moved into being YouTube, which was just sort of for fun. I was making climbing videos and some stuff which I thought would be helpful for the people to do with vans and things like that.
Yeah.
And then it sort of turned into a small business, which I maybe perhaps is in a sort of similar way you've kind of ended up where you are and doing what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of evolved out of it almost like a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. It was a total surprise for me too. I never really set out to become a tiny house like educator or tiny house person, other than just like wanting to build one and live in it. Yeah.
But I think there's something probably as well with you. There's something sort of intrinsic. I really like to share and educate and help people.
Yeah.
And I think from that sort of urge, like general base urge to like create things which were useful for other people to save them time or share that process, then suddenly you're adding value in a way which you didn't necessarily expect, and then that value creates something that you can kind of continue and make sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. So take me like on your kind of entrepreneurship journey when it comes to van conversion stuff. Was the van conversion guide kind of your first product, your first educational product that you put out there?
For vans, it was. Yeah. I've done a bunch of entrepreneurial stuff before, but to be honest, the van conversion guide started off as a little bit like slightly like throwaway. It was like, all right, I'll just do it. And I spent, a few days and just try and brain dumped my information, create images, diagrams. And the first version of the ebook wasn't amazing, but it answered all the questions that people were asking. And since then, we're in the 14th edition now. So it's obviously a lot better than it was. And we've put considerable time into making it what it is now.
Yeah, no, it's I bought it years ago, and I'm pleasantly surprised that you've continued issuing new editions and kind of keeping it updated with the current technology and techniques and van models. And also not to mention that the vans in the UK and in Europe are different vans than they are in the States, and you seem to cover all the bases.
Yeah, that's the genuine aim, because I realized quite early on that like a big part of like the market is US based, especially sort of California, that sort of that coast.
Yep.
So really, I've put a lot of effort to make sure that the guide is useful. But originally, for quite a long time, I had like US, Europe, and UK versions. Now it's one version, but I just basically spit out the key differences. Like whether we're using imperial or metric measurements.
Yeah.
And actually over that time, there's been some divergence in the vans. So the US and Europe has sprinters, but since Dodge came out with the ProMaster, that's the same as a very large number of vans in Europe. So it kind of actually made my job a bit easier because so many people are converting quite similar vehicles.
Nice. Well, that sounds like it does make it quite a bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you also have a course. I guess it's DIY Hero.
DIYhero.me. Yeah.
.me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So the course, I mean, I think, with any sort of business space, you end up with a situation where you're doing something for a while and then a load of people think, oh, we can do that too. They sort of basically replicate what they've done. I'm sure that's happened in your area as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you end up with like for van ebooks, how to convert a van. It's quite saturated. There's people who've come in and sort of, I don't want to say they ripped off, but they've basically been obviously been influenced by what you've done, and then they've built on it, or they've made something slightly different.
Sure.
So if you want to kind of stay in the game and have enough like revenue to make it sustainable, then you need to adapt, obviously, and branch out into different things. So the course was a way to okay, well, a lot of people are quite happy just to work from an ebook.
Yep.
But there are also many people for whom doing a DIY project is quite a scary undertaking. Maybe they've done like almost no DIY. They haven't even put up a shelf.
Yeah.
And the idea of the course is to take someone from like zero to hero. That's why I call it DIY Hero.
Yeah.
But the idea is it's like really hands-on, showing you like, sort of like almost classroom ones, which show you like how all the theory works, and then literally every single step in practice. It's like 170 videos long. It was an absolute monster of a project. I didn't quite appreciate how much work that had been when we went into it. But some of those videos are like an hour long or more, because it's like how to sew cushions. It's a big process. It took forever.
Yeah.
It took so much time, so much investment to make the course. But I'm really happy with how it's come out. People who are on the course so far just seem to really love it. They get a lot of value from it. And actually, surprisingly, there's a lot of people on it who actually, they're like, oh, I've renovated like, my house, or like the one floor of my house. And actually, the reason I buy the course is because I don't want to waste my time trying to work everything out. They just want to have it shown, because they I think if you've done a bunch of that work, you can appreciate how useful it is to have someone show you in practice how to do stuff and just cut to the chase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is interesting that someone who has renovated a house, who is kind of handy and knowledgeable, they know how long it takes to figure stuff out if you've never done it before. So having kind of a shortcut or just a manual is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. I mean, and they've definitely some of them explicitly said that, like, I'm buying the course. I know I could figure it out, but I just don't want to waste my time. I just want to build the van, and I want to just look at a video and then go and do it. And that's fine. I think it's really cool. There are some people who want to work it all out, but like, if that's not you, then a course or something is useful.
Yeah, the layout options of a van, that seems valuable. That's something that I appreciate in the ebook. And I've never converted a van myself, and I may never. It's kind of it's back there in my head as something that I'd love to do one day. And then during the pandemic, I was like, well, this is the time to do it. But that so did everybody else in the entire universe, had that same idea that it was time to convert a van. But having the kind of featured layouts, and because like it's a very small space, and so going with a layout that works well and is livable and functional is very important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, on the course and the ebook, we try and take people through that sort of design process, because it's two parts of it really. There's what you want and what's right for you. And if you've never lived in a van, then it's all hypotheticals, right? You're just looking at shiny things on the internet. You see them in YouTube videos or Instagram, and you're like, oh, I want.
Yeah. But
it doesn't mean it's necessarily great for living. So we try and sort of inject the reality into that and help people make sort of good decisions for them. So for example, if you're really tall, you probably don't want to be sleeping side to side, because it might be fine for a few days. But if you're living in it for like 3 months, it could just become really uncomfortable. And
yeah.
And I don't know. And there's also a lot of like optimism about, power systems and electrics. And we try to help people navigate that without spending an absolute fortune.
So you essentially had to build a new van to make the course.
Yeah, that was basically what I did. So I sold my van and bought a van, which was a real nuisance because it's the post-pandemic. So it's like 30% more expensive just for the base vehicle.
Yeah.
And it was 6 weeks late. So it really messed our schedule. But yeah, then I basically built a van for the best part of a month and had a guy, my camera guy, Ezra, he just filmed it continuously, every single part of the build. It was exhausting, actually. It was, and then we ended up with, well over 100 hours of footage, which had to be edited down into these like 170 videos.
Oh my gosh.
We came back to Spain, where I built a house. And I had 2 other guys with Ezra editing all the time for like 2 months, just working, just to try and get it done, like for the release date, which was January the 1st this year.
Wow.
And it was a real fight.
That's a huge project. And also like, having worked on, I built my house and I've fixed lots of stuff. And it's like, even when you know what you're doing, there's a lot of time that you're just kind of puzzling it out. And you try, you try turning it one way and it doesn't work. So you have to try it the other way. And so like, how do you handle that while you're supposed to be you're supposed to be teaching and you're like, well, that didn't work. I guess I'll try something else.
I think if there's any like real dithering, I mean, that's not really useful for people.
Tried to
just
cut it out.
Watching a load of dithering. And of course there are points where I just have to stare at things and like, okay, how is this? Because again, like you said, you're playing with very tight space constraints. So sometimes you've got to play with things a little bit. So mostly we just edit out my dithering. But also we're in a very short build schedule. So I built this van out in 25 days, and obviously we filmed all the like the educational videos, which is like sat at a table describing all the things. So it was a non-stop, very intense period for both me and Ezra, who did the filming. I was exhausted. And then also in the evening, you've got to order stuff to make sure you have all the stuff ready to do it in that short time. Logistics is like horrible. It's the worst part. I wouldn't recommend building a van in a really short period of time unless you're slightly sadistic and you like pain.
So like 25 days, it seems like if you are a pro, essentially, you can do it. What would be a more like reasonable time frame that you see people building out a van in?
So the way I see it is, for me to build out like a pretty high quality van, with a good number of systems. It does depend exactly. You could build out a van in a day if you're just banging in a bed and not worrying about anything. But for a pretty decent van, it would take me about 250 hours of labor. So if you're not very experienced, call it 300, and then it depends on how many hours you could put in a week. So you can just take that like baseline figure and you say, okay, well, I can put in 10 hours a week, and now you know how many weeks it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of weeks. So I think exactly. So and that's 10 hours a week every week. And I think what drags it out for a lot of people is often like, it's hard for them to build it because they've got to build it on the street, and they've got to put their tools away and take them out every time. And they come home from work and they're very tired and they just put it off, and then it takes like a year or something. And basically there is an advantage to doing it intensely. So like if you're going to take off a year to travel or something, you can maybe you can get a bunch done beforehand, but you just spent 3 weeks nonstop, 12 hours a day, and you get it done. It's just, I guess it depends on your situation, but if you're doing a pretty decent high quality, most of the systems sort of van conversion, consider 300 hours and then split that out over the weekends or the spare time or evenings you have.
And it seems like, if you really are going to DIY a van from start to finish, you're going to learn electrical, plumbing, gas line hookups, carpentry, just the whole gamut.
Window installation. I think it's one of the things which makes it intimidating, but it's also one of the really cool things about doing a van conversion project, which I guess is very similar to a tiny house, but it's like a different scale because the structure's already there for you. I think the cool thing is if you could build out a van conversion and you have put in your own plumbing, it's going to be push fit plumbing. It's basically the same as you put in a house.
Yep.
You might be installing some gas. I would always put a disclaimer: be careful of gas if you're not sure. Get someone to check it. But you can install a gas system and you learn about compression fittings and how that works. And then you're doing your electrics. And like when you install these things, I think for a lot of people, they come out with it just realizing that they can do a lot more. And it can transform how they think about themselves or their capabilities, or if they've got a little project at home or another project in the future, suddenly they realize they can work it out. They could build a whole van conversion, off-grid electric system.
So you mentioned that you renovated an old house completely. Do you feel like that's kind of an extension, or that was like the next step for you after doing the van conversions and just applying your skills to a traditional home?
I think in some ways it is. I think it's a mix. I mean, basically, I was traveling for 5 years, traveling in a van for 4 years, and I just really was craving like a workshop space and some studio space to like create things.
Yeah.
And in the end, like, long story short, it was a bit awkward to find industrial units and things in beautiful places. So in the end, I just bought an old house.
Yeah.
And once I pulled the trigger to buy it, then I pulled the trigger to go through that process of building it. And I could pay builders to do it, but then I'm going to need a lot more money, and it's going to take a lot more time because, like, to replace a roof, then you've got to find the roofing contractors, and they'll be like, oh, we can start in 6 months' time.
Yep.
So for me, that wasn't an option. I didn't want to sit around waiting for a house to be built for like 3 years.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm just going to get it. I'm going to do it. And I think, some of that, belief of like, well, I can. If you believe you can, everything else is figure outable.
Yep.
And basically and also without the pandemic, if I was paying people to do it, the pandemic would have just pushed it back by another year. So it was 100% a really good thing for me to do by myself. And I think it's an extension of that similar mentality and sort of self-belief you can get when you sort of can build anything.
Yeah. So what did you do? What did you end up having to do in this house?
Oh, basically, so the house is like about 250 years old. The walls are made of sort of like stuck together mud and mortar and rock. It's like really, it's an ancient, the ground floor, the walls are like 1/2 meter wide, like 1.5 feet wide or something. It's old. And it comes with this barn and land, and it looks over this like super beautiful scenic part of the Pyrenees directly at some like climbing sectors. So it's like on point for me. And the house, basically the house needed like the roof taken off, all the internal walls taken out, some of the internal floors, some openings made. And then basically you're taking it down to like just 4 walls and like 2 floors, and then it's rebuilt. So it's like pretty major work.
Wow.
And I didn't really speak Spanish at the time, or Catalan, which is the language here. And I definitely did not know how to build a house or do mains electric or plumbing or heat recovery systems or solar. So there's definitely like some learning involved there.
Yeah.
And some like serious like graph.
So how do you approach learning something new, like those things that you just mentioned? Are you watching YouTube videos? Are you going to the hardware store and talking to people? Like, how do you kind of gain the confidence to actually start in on a job that you've not ever, that you don't know how to do it, or you've never done it before?
So I would say like all of the above, Yeah. So like to do the roof. So there's not really any videos on YouTube to show you how to build the roof in the style of the roofs that I built here. So firstly, I had an architect, because you have to have an architect to do major work. So the architect could specify like the beams, because she does the structural work, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this old guy in the village called Cisco he was a builder for a while, and he's retired. So he like gave me some good tips on how to do it. And actually he would pop around every so often and check I got things, straight. Because if your beams are out of sync, then you're causing yourself a real headache later.
Yep.
And then there's like a big dose of optimism. And I was also just like going around looking at roofs. Just looking at other roofs just to try like garner how the hell this is going to be done. And in the end it was fine. It just sort of came together. It was just because once you got like the beams delivered, the roof material delivered, and you know roughly what you do with the bond beam. Like you got to put this big bond beam around it, because none of the walls are like pinned together properly. So you've got to like set the house. yeah, it was just a matter of just getting on with it. And I think this is like the true of almost everything in terms of like building stuff, is that once you've got the stuff in front of you, you can just figure it out. Like if you get all the things, like for me, it took the longest to work out. I have a wood fire with a back boiler and a heating system, and there's some complexity to it.
Yeah.
But still, once I got all the stuff in front of me, and I just spent the time, it's all figure outable. Like everything is, some of it's a pain in the ass, but it's all, you can figure it out once you got the stuff.
Yeah, totally. I also find like sleeping is great. Like I'm actually renovating a small bathroom right now in a condo that was just like, it was nasty. So, and I wasn't expecting to have to do it, but it just it just happened. Like the toilet was leaking and it was gross. So I just pulled it out, and then I was like, oh, we need a new vanity. And then the floors were nasty. So I pulled those up, and the bath fan, pulled that down. And so like, I think the other night I was like taking a bath because I was so tired from working overhead. And I just watched the install video for this new bath fan like 3 times, and it just like didn't make sense to me. And then I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh, I know how to install this bath fan. It just like there's some magic to sleeping.
Yeah. I think your brain definitely processes these things. I can remember when I was doing the house, I was doing it quite intensely because I get a bit obsessed with like physical hands-on projects because I just want them to be finished. And I know this isn't like enjoying the journey stuff. I'm not enjoying the journey. I'm enjoying, because again, like to me, the house was a tool to do my other projects. I'm not excited about being a builder, but I am excited about doing the project. So I was doing it extremely intensely, and every night I was dreaming of building things. Like every night. It was like you're kind of not escaping it, but I'm definitely sure I'm like solving these problems in my sleep, working these, because there's endless problems with old house renovation, as you probably know, if you're refitting a bathroom.
Endless problems and all the things that people did poorly 50 years ago. You have to work extra hard to kind of mitigate the poor decisions that people made.
Absolutely.
Before you.
Yeah. Well, the surprise is when you take things out and you're like, okay, it turns out that every time they went up a level, they moved the walls, they made the walls thinner. They didn't have to support so much weight. And that made a real problem when you're running pipes and things. It's just all these things, it just surprises.
Oh my. Well, one thing that I'm always curious about in vans is just dealing with cold weather, because I know that with that metal skin, you can run into problems with moisture and things. So I was just curious, what is the kind of latest best practice, I guess you could say, for insulating a van so that it's comfy when it's cold out?
So I actually think when it's cold, your 2 problems are not so much the cold. The moisture is a problem, because condensation, obviously, on a metal skin would be a huge problem. I had a friend who did Chamonix. So this is like 1,000 meters. It's in the French Alps. He did a Chamonix winter with a non-insulated van, and I visited him, and it was horrible. Like in the night, it all froze, and then when he drove, it all rained. It was awful. So it is a big problem.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get away with it in super dry, arid climates in deserts and things, but in general, you want to insulate and you want to put in a vapor barrier so that it doesn't condensate onto something, and the humidity, you can extract it or it will just leave, but it won't just build up on your van or your skin or in your sills. So that is a seriously important thing to do, in my opinion, with a van conversion. So in terms of like the latest and best methods, I mean, the best method is the one that you can do well.
Okay.
In my opinion. So probably the most effective one is when you have a professional come in and spray the foam all over the inside of the van. It does create other challenges for the build because you just sprayed foam all over your substructures. Yeah. But that's probably like the most effective way. But that's not the way I do, because I just prefer to crack on do it myself. I tend to use recycled bottle like fleece, and I put the fleece in. I use spray foam on the hard to stuff areas, and then I just do a really good job on the vapor barrier, like a foil-based vapor barrier. Tape it all in with aluminium tape, and just be careful with it. And I've never had a problem with condensation in vans.
Nice.
When it's cold, and really, so apart from the moisture thing, I think the most important part of insulation is actually for the heat, because let's say you're somewhere quite hot, and if your van and all the thermal mass, the mass of the thermal capacity inside your van heats up, and then at nighttime you're trying to cool your van down, it's going to take forever because everything got so hot in the daytime. So good insulation and is almost more important in summer. So the van, it'll get warm and stuffy when it's closed up, but it doesn't get really hot.
Right.
And that's probably the most important thing, because it's quite easy to heat a van. You just use gas heater. Done. Right. It's much, if you're off grid, it's much harder to cool the van down in terms of your power systems, just because of how much energy, electrical energy, that an AC unit will consume. So yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then I'm sure just when you're actually living it day to day, finding a parking spot that's in the shade, if possible, is probably really helpful. And being strategic.
So long as you get enough solar. This is the other thing.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the shade too much. So you kind of want to be well insulated and in the sun and have nice, healthy, topped up batteries.
All right.
There are like 12-volt AC units coming out, which are a little bit smaller than the traditional RV ones, which are only really designed to be plugged in. And they are becoming a little bit more feasible if you've got like a pretty good solar array and a really good battery to battery charger, and you've got a big battery bank. But that all comes at like a cost. So you install your AC unit and it costs you $2,000, but now you've got to add like $5,000 to your electrical kit. And there's probably better ways of going about it, unless you're really going to tropical climates.
Yeah. Well, I like this concept of kind of using van life as a tool to enable kind of a better life. That it's not the van life is just the tool that you use to achieve this lifestyle that you want. Can you give some examples of maybe people that have taken your courses and kind of told you about what they're doing in van life, or do you have any kind of stories to kind of illuminate that?
So in terms of the course, we've only been live for 8 months. So there's only one person who's like done and dusted, finished his van and is off.
Nice.
The others are still, because mostly people get it before they've bought the van, because we help them go through that process. Yeah. And it's a good way if they can sort of bounce ideas of people or get like real advice. And so it takes a couple months, and so no one else has finished the course yet. But in general, I just know a lot of people, and I've met a lot of people, and people either through my business or just on the road, who have used van life to set themselves free of like rent tyranny. Like it's a big problem for people, especially younger people who haven't got in the housing market, or older people who they've been working a long time, and they're just starting to realize that it's hard to sort of take time off because they've got to still pay rent or whatever. So it's, I think like I have like a big bugbear with the property market and what we've collectively allowed to happen to it. And this is obviously must be really significant for the tiny house movement as well.
Yeah. Tiny houses have gotten more commercialized, which in some ways is good because you can now easily find a well-built, professionally built tiny house. Yeah. The problem is that a tiny house, when people ask, I asked you how many hours of labor question for a tiny house, 1,000 plus.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I can imagine.
And so, and if you're a pro builder, maybe you're getting that down by 10 or 15%, but like there's no way around, all the systems, all the labor. And so, a professionally built tiny house, I would say the least expensive ones that I see are, start around $65,000.
Yeah.
And go up into the territory where there are traditional homes that, that you could buy. Yeah. They're not going to be new construction. They're not going to be mobile tiny houses, but it and of course the cost of building materials has, like everywhere, has gone up significantly, particularly during the pandemic. But now they're back down a little bit.
With tiny houses, I guess part of it is once let's say it's a big capital expenditure, you buy a really nice tiny house and it saves you. And maybe you could technically buy a traditional house with that money, but once you've got it, I guess your ongoing costs are really low, right? Because it's like super energy efficient, and you're not heating very much space.
It's energy efficient, and typically, I don't know how it works where you are, but in the States, you have to pay property tax on your house, and that's what usually funds your town or your city.
Yeah.
And it's, it can be thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
And so tiny houses in most places are not considered to be houses, so they don't get taxed.
You
save money there.
Non-permanent
They're not permanent,
or something.
But then the like downside to that is that you're not living legally, so you're always at risk of being asked to leave.
Yeah.
So there's kind of the dark side to kind of being in that legal gray area.
But I would imagine if you're in I don't know, again, depends probably on the state as well as the country.
Yeah.
But like here, it's like based on livable square footage.
Yeah.
So I guess even if you are taxed with a tiny house, it's like it's a tiny house. So if the tax is based on the square footage of your house or the property value or something, you're still going to be paying like a much lower tax rate than if you buy your general large format American home. Yeah.
I actually had a tax bill on my tiny house for a couple of years when it was parked in this one town that saw it and said, yeah, you that's fine, but we want to tax you. So I was legal there. I think my tax bill was about $500 a year. Which
that's affordable,
not
isn't
bad.
it?
It's downright affordable. I think, what's also happening in the tiny house world is that, people are developing places to park them that have, all the hookups, all the amenities, but that does add a cost to the lifestyle. It's essentially you have a rent bill on top of owning your house. And I do think that tiny house living is absolutely still way more affordable than conventional living. Even if your tiny house costs you $100,000, and even if you have to pay $500 or $600 a month for a spot rental, just the amount of things that you can physically buy and consume just are so much less. So you save money in the lifestyle, at least in how much stuff you can own.
So you see, it's almost like it almost like constrains your ability to consume. It's like a capture consumerism based on your space.
Exactly. Yeah. People just tend to fill the space that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's interesting. I think like in general, the same with vans and van life, and I imagine it's very similar to tiny homes. I think people have often said to me, well, it's like a trend and it'll go away pretty soon. And I've done a lot of like research on this and I'm thinking on it, and I think it's really directly linked to like housing crisis and cost of housing, and unless they can sort that out, which governments don't really want to bring down the price of houses, it will piss off lots of their electorate who vote.
Yeah.
So unless they solve that somehow, then tiny houses, or the appeal of basically living in more affordable alternative ways, like to live a adventurous life, or just live a life which isn't only working, or enable them to retire, or enable people to just cut loose for a while. I think it's here to stay.
I believe I agree completely. There was this article in Wired magazine about a month ago that was like, what happened to the tiny house movement? And the title, the headline was more offensive than the article itself, because while the reality TV shows might not be like as popular or as visible, what's happened over the last couple of years is that like there are several like real legitimate advocacy efforts that are legalizing tiny houses state by state. I mean, like every month or two you hear about, another state has, essentially legalized tiny houses, and so that's happening. And, I wanted to comment on what you said earlier about the kind of the tiny house movement and the van life movement. I consider a van a tiny house as well. Like they're kind of all under this umbrella.
It really is. Yeah.
And yet it's such a different crowd. I would say that, at least the people, most people who are listening to my, podcast, or people who are reaching out to me, joining my online community and that kind of stuff, tend to be people who are reaching retirement age, who want to stop working and basically take the money that they've saved up, if they've saved any up, and live affordably and stretch that money out. And tiny houses are great for that. And so then the younger people are doing tiny houses, but they're not staying in them long term. They're kind of, that's like their first
transition.
house, and then it's transition, and both are fine. There's nothing wrong with just because you've decided to build a van or do a tiny house doesn't mean you're like you've failed if you don't live in it forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's interesting as an observation. I think younger people are probably more attracted to van life because it's like, it's a bit of a more secure way of living. It's less convenient. And they probably also are like excited to travel and hit the road and have adventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not to say that older people aren't interested in doing those things, but they're not looking to do that as their full-time like life.
Right.
I think, a tiny home probably appeals, it's like you said, probably to people, especially who are looking to retire, cut down their costs, escape, endless work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it all just comes down to cost of living, or like a failure in our society, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. We've definitely failed on the housing front, or we're in a period of time where there is not enough housing, and the housing that there is just too expensive.
It's outrageous. And to be honest, I think in the States, you've got it a little bit better than, say, if you live in the UK, because you pretty much can't just anywhere in the UK put a tiny house on a piece of land that you own. You just can't.
Right.
The council will tell you to move it or get rid of it. So I actually find that slightly outrageous that you're not, you don't have the right to house yourself. You have to buy in to expensive mortgage up system, with traditional structures. Years ago, I wanted to buy like this wooden beach hut it's like a beautiful place, like 9 meters. It's a tiny home basically, but with planning permission and fixed. And there's no way to get a mortgage on it because it was non-standard structure. It's made of wood, which is perfectly reasonable way to build a house. In the States, it's like largely wood constructions, but it's so inflexible how they do the planning rules that it just makes it a lot harder. And I think in the UK, maybe vans are more attractive because you don't have that problem. You can just get in your van and you can park it anywhere. You can park your van on a piece of land if you wanted to, but not a tiny home.
Is it legal to live in the van though?
So if no one complains about it, you're pretty good. Yeah. The UK has recently passed some laws to do with vehicle living, which is a little bit more restrictive. I mean, it's targeting like the gypsy traveler community, less so than it is the van lifers who tend to be young people and going on trips or whatever. But it's pretty well tolerated. In other countries, it's like in Europe, it's much more like defined to be completely fine to be sleeping in your van. But yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I've been a little while since I've interviewed anyone who's in the tiny house world in the UK, but like it's very limited what you can place and where.
Which is probably why you haven't had so many to talk to. It's just really difficult. It's very difficult there.
Yeah,
and the property prices are outrageous across the country, but especially in areas where there's any economic sort of opportunity. Yeah. It's very, very difficult.
Well,
which is partly why I live in a house in Spain in the mountains. Which I mean, there's people who bought vans. I know people who buy vans and fit them out, expensive fit outs, which cost more than my house, including the renovation.
Yeah.
So it's I could come here, and it's again, it all comes back from like the ability to live in the van. So I was living in a van, which allowed me to explore these different places, which allowed me to find my house. When I renovated my house, I was living in my van, which meant I didn't have to any other cost, didn't have to rent somewhere.
Right.
And just that whole process, and the house is just like, it serves the same purpose. It means I can live like debt free in somewhere. I can spend way more time working on things I want to do without the massive overhead of living in a city or paying insane amounts on mortgages, which now have gone up by 30% because of the interest rate changes.
Exactly. Oh, the interest rates. So you have, I don't know if it's still happening or it's going to be happening. You're doing a webinar on how to live zero cost van life.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, if this interests anyone in your audience.
Yeah.
But basically, I've put out a free webinar that anyone can join, and it shows people how they can make owning a van cost nothing. So it's basically considering out how to build it, price points, how to determine how much to spend on the conversion compared with the cost of the base van.
Yeah.
And how to go through that process, how to understand how to buy a converter van in a way that, you could use it for 3 years, have a time of your life, come back, and then you could sell it for a profit or break even. And that depends on the value of the van, the quality of your workmanship, and all these things factor in. So it's basically a webinar, which of course partly promotes my course, but it also gives really, really valuable information that helps people understand exactly how to make van life cost nothing.
Yeah. And that's something that has always fascinated me about van life is that you can oftentimes sell your van if you've converted it yourself and at least break even, if not profit.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I mean, it's both my last two vans. The first van, it was more of a break even because had some miles on it and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was cool. It's like 3 years of some of the best 3 years of travel and climbing in my life. And it cost me nothing apart from some labor, which I did in 17 days. So, and I mean, you're launched my YouTube channel, so I can't really complain about that. And then the second van, I made some like $18,000 profit on it. It was like a newer van and a higher quality like install and kit and things like that. So it fit the market, hit the market right. But again, like I used it for 3 years. I lived in it while I built my house. I traveled in it. When I sell it, and then it doesn't cost me anything. It's better. It makes me some money. So I mean, it's really cool. I mean, obviously, it's that's not a consideration that everyone particularly cares about.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, they get looking at van life and like, oh, this is going to cost a lot of money, but not necessarily. I would imagine there's a similar vibe potentially with tiny house. But I guess most people with tiny house, they're looking for like a longer term permanent thing. Whereas I would say the majority of people looking at van life aren't looking to live in it forever or like 20 years or something. They're more like, I'll live in it for a few years or travel in it and then sell it.
I think that vans are pretty unique in that way, because I haven't seen tiny houses appreciating in value in the same way.
Yeah.
They're depreciating in the way that a vehicle just. I think the thing with the van is that you're adding so much value. You're taking this empty van that is useful to a certain, it's useful to contractors and builders and tradespeople, and then you're turning it into this like toy for people to enjoy, and so you're going to live in it, but you might sell it to somebody who's like, yeah, I'm just going to go out on weekends. I'm going to go mountain biking. I'm going to, this is going to kind of be a toy for me. So I think you're like maybe tapping into a different demographic when you sell the van.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're selling it to people who want the ready-made build, right? So
yeah.
But I would imagine, if you're like the younger people who build a tiny house to live in for a few years before they go to a conventional house or something, then if they build it themselves, I would imagine they could turn some profit if they didn't live in it for a really long time or something.
Yeah, definitely. And as long as you don't factor in your time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's clearly the thing. But I guess again, with like the van conversions, you're building out yourself and you get sort of some intrinsic value from that, and you build it exactly how you want it.
Yeah. And
you kind of want to do it anyway. Or if you want to buy a ready-made one, then you got to shell out a lot more money. And it's going to depreciate. So it's like it's not only a cost up front, but it's like a depreciating asset. Then.
Yeah. Well, Nate Murphy, it's been so great to chat with you and get to finally meet you. The man, the myth, the legend, Nate Murphy. People should definitely check out DIYhero.me and the van conversion guide. We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes for this episode. Thanks, Nate.
I appreciate it, Ethan. Thanks so much for having you on.
Thank you so much to Nate Murphy for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes, including photos of Nate's van conversions and his home in the Pyrenees, plus links to everything we talked about at thetinyhouse.net/284. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/284. And before we go, just a quick administrative note. The podcast will be going to an every other week format through the end of the year. I have some exciting construction projects that I'm working on right now and want to continue to deliver the best possible interviews on the show. And so I decided that the best thing to do would be to go to an every other week format so that I could still give you the best stuff, but not have to make it quite so often. We'll be back to our regular calendar in 2024, and I hope you stay tuned and stay subscribed to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.